What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Stamina Warden. So the Stamina Warden is a pretty strong stamina DPS class in Wrathstone right now, mainly because of their very powerful cleave damage that they have through Subterranean Assault. It's one of the strongest cleave damage moves in the game right now, comparable to that of Steel Tornado. In fact, it can possibly even surpass Steel Tornado in terms of damage done, because Subterranean Assault also applies major fracture to everything that it hits. So Stamina Wardens, very strong. They also have built-in Minor Berserk through Bird of Prey. So combine this with their very powerful AoE and you have a very strong class overall. Now that being said, Stamina Nightblades still pull higher DPS on average compared to Stamina Wardens, but Stamina Wardens are definitely a very strong contender for that top DPS spot because of the additional cleave damage compared to that of a Stamina Nightblade, as well as the fact that they have a cheap ultimate to run as well. So they're also very good for running War Machine. Them and the Nightblades are kind of share that role where you can run War Machine on either class and be able to provide the group with Major Slayer that way. So Wardens are a very nice class. So if you have access to the class itself and you kind of want something a little bit different from Stamina Nightblades, I would definitely recommend checking out a Stamina Warden build. Now, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Now, when we go over the gear, I will be going over a couple of substitutions that you might want to consider making, depending on what sort of DLCs you have and things like that. So I will talk a little bit when we go over the gear about these sort of alternative gear sets that you might want to run. And then we'll go over our rotation, just kind of talk about what's going on with the rotation, because we are going to be centered a little bit differently here. So instead of kind of like a static backbar rotation, it's going to be more similar to a Stamina Nightblade, where we will have a more dynamic rotation centered around Subterranean Assault. So I will talk about kind of how you approach that, and then we'll do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the kind of DPS that you're able to pull on a Stamina Warden. So starting things off here first with our gear. So in terms of Monster Helm sets, Velidreth is still going to be the best option here. In terms of like best gear, there really hasn't been any changes between Murkmire and Wrathstone. So there's not all too much that has changed. So you're still pretty much going to use exactly the same set that you have been running in Murkmire. The only thing that's going to change is going to be the front bar traits, and we'll go over that in a few minutes here. So Velidreth is a DLC set. You have to get it from Cradle of Shadows, which is a Shadows of the Hist DLC. So if you don't have access to that DLC, you do have a couple other Monster Helm options here. The first one, let me see if I have it first. Oh, it's not here. So the first one that I'm going to mention is a base game set. It is Selene's. So this is dropped from Selene's web. So it gives you max stamina, and then whenever you deal direct damage, you have a 50% chance to maul the closest enemy in front of you for, in this case, 19,080 physical damage. Can occur once every 4 seconds. So this is actually very competitive for a single target DPS with Velidreth on bosses with fairly small hitboxes. So normal sized hitboxes, just go with that. But the strength behind Velidreth is the fact that each of those 3 disease spores can actually hit the boss at the same time if it has a large enough hitbox. So it can actually get multiple hits of Velidreth instead of 1 hit compared to Selene's. Now Selene's does proc twice as often as Velidreth, so in that regard, Selene's does catch up a little bit when it comes to DPS that way, but Selene's also kind of has that limitation that it only deals damage to 1 enemy. Velidreth can deal damage to up to 3 enemies because there's 3 disease spores. So that's kind of the trade-off that you're making if you're going to be running Selene's instead. But if you don't have access to Shadow of the Hits DLC, then Selene's is going to be the best Monster Helm set to run. Another Monster Helm set that you might want to consider running, mainly because Stamina Wardens do have a little bit of a sustain issue. They don't have quite as good sustain as a Stamina Nightblade, is going to be Stormfist. So Stormfist, the 1-piece adds some stamina regen, which is helpful to help you sustain your rotation. And then 2-piece, when you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to create a Thunder Fist to crush the enemy, dealing, in this instance, 24 to 42 shock damage every second for 3 seconds. And then a final 12,720 physical damage after those 3 seconds are up. Expect to occur once every 8 seconds. So this is nice for the additional sustain. The damage is also pretty decent as well. Not quite as high as Selene's or Velidreth's, but still very respectable nonetheless. The shock damage can also inflict minor vulnerability if you're kind of into that. Maybe if your healer is not able to run IA, you can use this to kind of help out with minor vulnerability uptime, even though shock damage enchants are going to be a lot more consistent overall. Now the thing with Stormfist is that the proc stays in place once it happens. So if the boss happens to move out of that Stormfist, then you do lose the damage that you would have otherwise gained if the boss had stayed in it. So for more mobile bosses, Stormfist is not going to be quite as useful, but it does have a little bit of a cleave, so it does have 4 meters, so it does, unlike Selene's, have a little bit of cleave potential behind it there. Those are your 3 primary Monster Helm set options here. Now for the body set, we're still going with Relequens. Relequens is still a very, very powerful proc set. This is probably the strongest set in the game right now for stamina DPS. You have to get it from Cloud Rest, so I have the perfect version here, which you need to get from clearing Vet Cloud Rest +1 and above. So if you can't clear Vet Cloud Rest +1, then you can get the imperfect version, which drops from just normal Vet Cloud Rest +0 and normal Cloud Rest. So if you can't get the +1 or +2 or +3 clear, then you can just use the normal version of Relequen until you can get that clear. The main difference is that 1096 max stamina, which is not that big of a deal. Perfect Relequen is going to be stronger, but it's not going to be noticeably stronger. You're talking about maybe about 1% increase in DPS just from that max stamina itself. So not that big of a deal if you can't get the perfect Relequen pieces that you need. Now, Relequen does have to be on the body because you don't want to drop all those 20 stacks, because if you drop the stacks, then you lose all of them at once, so you want to make sure to maintain them. So you typically want Relequen as your body set. Now, if you don't have access to the Somerset expansion in order to get Relequen, you do have a few other options. First set I'm going to talk about, I actually don't have on hand because it is a crafted set. It's going to be Hunding's Rage. So Hunding's Rage is a crafted set, 6 traits. It is a base game set, so you can either craft it yourself, you can get somebody to craft it for you, or you can buy it off of guild traders. The 5-piece gives you 299 weapon damage, and that's a static bonus. So you want to make sure that it's always on your body. So you don't want it to be on your front bar set, for example, because when you swap to your back bar, your Maelstrom Bow, you'll lose that 299 weapon damage. So Hunding's Rage, very easy set to obtain, pretty strong overall. It's not going to be quite as strong as some other sets that you might run instead, but it's a very consistent set and it's a very easy set to obtain. So for those of you guys who are just starting to farm your sets, Hunding's is a very good holdover set until you're able to pick up those other sets that you need to run here. Another set that you might want to consider running is going to be Leviathan. This is a medium armor set found in Crypt of Hearts. This is basically the stamina version of Mother's Sorrow. It just gives you a lot of weapon crit. So very similar to Hunding's Rage. This 5-piece is static, so you want to make sure this is on your body set at all times. So that way you don't lose the weapon crit when you end up bar swapping here. Another set that I want to mention here, I actually don't have it, so I need to find it now. It's going to be Briarheart. So Briarheart is a drop set that you can get from... Where's Briarheart? It is a drop set from... Here it is, from Hrothgar. So you can buy it off of guild traders, or you can farm it yourself from Hrothgar if you have access to the Hrothgar DLC. So this can be either a body set, or you can wear it on the front bar because it is a proc set, so it will carry over to your back bar when it procs. So this is a very nice set to run here. Get some nice heals whenever you do a critical hit. Overall, the 5-piece is going to give you about as much damage as Hunding's will. The difference is that, unlike Hunding's, if you have this as a front bar set and it procs, it actually carries over to your back bar, so you don't have to worry about necessarily losing that weapon damage when you bar swap. So that's the advantage of running Briarheart. So those are kind of a few options that you could run for your body set. Now for your front bar set, Advancing Yokeda is still the strongest set for your front bar set as a Stamina Warden. This is a heavy armor set that comes from any of the 3 Kra'gh trials, so that's Helra Citadel, Ethereal Archive, or Sanctum. Actually, no, you can only get this from Helra Citadel. I apologize, I'm mixing it up with a different set here. So you do need to transmute the jewelry. So even though it is a base game set, you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to transmute the jewelry, because otherwise it'll come in healthy, which is not a good DPS jewelry trait to have. So you do need to have Somerset if you want to make the most use out of Advancing Yokeda. Then you have 2 daggers here as your front bar set, and then you have the Maelstrom Bow as the back bar here. So for your weapons, we have Nirn Sharpened here. So this is a change compared to the double infused meta from Murkmire. You can go with Sharpened if you would like, and that allows you to take a few points out of piercing and put them into other CP nodes. The difference between Nirn Sharpened versus Sharpened, double Sharpened, is going to be pretty small overall as long as you're optimizing correctly. Your enchants remain exactly the same though, so poison damage and absorb stamina enchant. Now, because you don't have any infused traits here, you can pretty much put them on whatever hand you'd like here. One other potential option you might want to consider running, because we are running the Shadow Mundus if we're going with this setup here, is going to be Nirnhoned and Precise with the Lover Mundus. So that's another option there. That basically allows you, very similarly to running double Sharpened with the Shadow Mundus, take a lot of points out of piercing, put them into other CP nodes instead. However, based on testing, raid buff tests done by Lyco in earlier this week, I believe it was actually last week, late last week, he found that Nirn Sharpened and Double Sharpened with the Shadow Mundus ended up doing better. So you can run Nirn Precise or Nirn Infused with the Lover Mundus, but this particular setup is going to give you a little bit more single target DPS that way. Now our Maelstrom Bow is exactly the same, infused with weapon damage enchant. Now for our jewelry traits and enchants, we're going with all weapon damage, and then we're going with all Bloodthirsty. Now currently the Bear Ultimate does not scale with Bloodthirsty at all. It has been a long-going bug, and ZOS has not really addressed when they're going to be able to fix this. But Bloodthirsty still affects the rest of your damage, so you still want to run it. Bloodthirsty is definitely one of the strongest jewelry traits for pure DPS. If you don't want to run Bloodthirsty though, you can run Infused instead. So there are some fights where Infused is going to be a little bit stronger because you're not necessarily going to be an execute for a very long period of time, so Bloodthirsty won't be able to really give you as much bonus DPS. So in that instance, you would want to run Infused instead. So with the Infused trait, that basically boosts your weapon damage enchant there, and it's going to be a lot stronger compared to a robust jewelry trait because of you have a lot more weapon damage modifiers than you do max stamina modifiers. If the last case scenario though, if you're running, like for example, Briarheart as your front bar set, you can go with robust. If you don't have the transmute stones to kind of transmute things into Infused or Bloodthirsty. Now for weapon traits and enchants, we're all stamina, all divines, and we are going 7 medium. You can replace a small piece, in this case one of the Velidreth pieces, with heavy if you want some additional survivability, but 7 medium pieces will give you the most DPS overall. Alright, now we'll go over our character sheet. So in this instance, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are a very, very strong stamina DPS race in Wrathstone. They get 1875 additional max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. Orcs are going to be a little bit stronger. They have 2000 max stamina with a 258 weapon damage. So the difference between Dark Elf and Orc is going to be very, very minimal because the main difference between them is that 125 additional stamina that the Orc has. So really you can go with either of them. Dark Elf, if you decide to go with Dark Elves, does give you a little bit of flexibility in case you want to run a Magicka Warden for whatever reason, because they also get 1875 additional max Magicka, as well as 258 spell damage. So if you want to play Magicka Wardens later on down the line, you want to kind of change up your playstyle a little bit, you should go with a Dark Elf. Otherwise, you can go with an Orc instead. 3 other potential races that you might want to consider running are going to be the Khajiits. They get 825 max health, magicka, and stamina, so they get a little bit of additional stamina. They get 85 additional stamina regen on top of 85 additional magicka regen and 100 additional health regen. So you get a little bit of sustain, a little bit of max resources, and they get 10% additional crit damage done. So that just helps out your crit damage overall. Not going to be quite as strong as the 258 weapon damage from the Orcs or the Dark Elves, but it's still going to be a nice boost to your DPS nonetheless. Then the other 2 races that are going to be more sustain focused are going to be the Redguards and the Wood Elves. Both races get 2000 additional max stamina. Redguards get the Adrenaline Rush passive, which restores 950 stamina on direct damage hits every 5 seconds, versus the Wood Elves, which get 258 additional stamina regen. So both of these races are more focused on sustain, so it might be an option for Wardens because Wardens do have a little bit of sustain issue, but generally speaking, if you're able to sustain, then running an Orc or a Dark Elf is going to give you more DPS because Redguards and Bosmer do not have the 258 weapon damage that the Orcs and the Dunmer have. For attributes, we have 64 points into stamina here. If you want to improve your survivability by a little bit, you can shift some points into health if you desire. I would personally put no more than 10 points into health, because at that point you're kind of giving up a little bit too much max stamina for survivability. It's better off to kind of learn the mechanics of the fight and try to improve your own survivability in other ways compared to just putting more points into health. For Mundus Stone, we're going with the Shadow here, so we are going to end up dumping CP points into Piercing to kind of make up for the loss of the Lover Mundus. But like I mentioned earlier, based on tests done by Lyco late last week, the Shadow with Nirn Sharpened or Double Sharpened is going to be stronger than running the Lover Mundus with Nirn Precise or Nirn Infused. And then for food, I am running Lavafoot just for the purposes of the parse at the end of the video. In an actual raid, you should be running either Dubious Camoran Throne or Artaeum Takeaway Bra. So this will give you max health, max stamina, and max stamina regen. So with the stamina regen from Dubious Camoran Throne on top of orb support from your healer, you should be able to sustain a light attack rotation decently well. You might need a heavy attack here and there, but overall you should be able to do pretty good sustain because you have that 319 stamina regen from the food as well as your orb support. So that's about just shy of 400 additional effective stamina regen. So Lava Foot is just here to kind of simulate if you were on blue food and you were getting just orbs as additional sustain that way. Now we'll go over our skill bars. We have Cutting Dive, Subterranean Assault, Rending Slashes, Bull Netch, Bird of Prey, and Wild Guardian. Then for our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Rearming Trap, Bird of Prey, and Wild Guardian. So Bird of Prey here is for the passive Minor Berserk while we have it slotted, so we have that on both bars here. Now you will notice that we have 4 active abilities on our back bar here, and that's just because, and I'll go over this when we talk about the rotation part of the build video, that's just because we are going to be swapping to our front bar fairly often to get Subterranean Assault going off. So it's okay that we're running Rearming Trap on the back bar in this instance because of the way the Warden rotation works. Now, if you don't want to run the bear, then you can run a different ultimate setup. So you can run Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar. Then on the back bar, instead of the bear, you would be running Ballista instead. So it's just the bow ultimate. So this is kind of an alternative ultimate setup if you want to. Generally speaking, the bear is going to do a little bit more DPS compared to Flawless Dawnbreaker and Ballista. But the DPS difference between the two of them is going to be pretty small overall. You're talking maybe like 1k at most. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so they have frozen any sort of CP increases while they're taking a look at the champion point system and how they're going to rework it. So the CP cap is 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation colors. So starting off with our green CPs, I have 75 into Mooncap and 75 into Tenacity. That gives us 120 points remaining, which you can put into the remaining nodes however you'd really like. So 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, 40 Warlord for kind of a very balanced approach here. Now you can push Mooncap and Tenacity up to 100 to get that last percentage point if you so desire, and then that leaves you 70 points to kind of, again, play around with however you'd like. For our blue CPs, this particular CP setup is specifically for Nirn Sharpened. So I'll go over 2 other blue CP setups, one for double Sharpened, and then a third one for if you're running the Lover and you're running something like Nirn Precise or Nirn Infused. So if you're running Nirn Sharpened with the Shadow, you have 49 into Mighty, 61 into Piercing, 52 into Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge, and 56 into Master at Arms. Now, if you are running double Sharpened, that gives you about 1,300 or so additional penetration from the Sharpened, extra Sharpened. So you want to drop this down a little bit here. So if you just want to take out 13, then obviously if you do the math, real quick mental math, you'd be sitting at around 3,100 or so. You'd be sitting at closer to about 36 piercing, 36, 37 piercing. You'd be able to bump up Mighty back up to 64. You'd be able to bump Precise Strikes up to 56. Thaumaturge up to 56 as well. And you might as well just bump Piercing all the way up to 38 here. So 38 Piercing, 64 Mighty, 56 Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge, and 56 Master at Arms for double Sharpened with the Shadow Mundus. Now if you're running the Lover instead, in that case you would drop down Piercing another 10 points here. You'd push Precise Strikes up to 61 and Thaumaturge up to 61. So if you're running the Lover with Nirn Precise, you'd go 64 Mighty, 28 Piercing, 61 Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge, and 56 into Master at Arms. And finally, for our red CPs, this is a one-size-fits-most kind of a distribution that I have here. So this will give you good mitigation across all the different pieces of content that you might run, but if you want to maximize mitigation, you will need to kind of reallocate your red CPs in order for that specific trial that you're going to be running that night. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much all the build information that you guys will need. Now let's go ahead and talk about the rotations. So I mentioned earlier that our rotation is going to be centered around Subterranean Assault. Subterranean Assault, you can think of it as a 3-second dot, because after 3 seconds, that's when the shocks will actually deal their damage. Now, if you think about global cooldowns, that basically gives you enough time to do 2 global cooldowns, so 2 abilities, and then you can use shocks again. So you want to maximize getting that shocks parse going. You want to make sure you're getting as many shocks as you can, so you're generally your rotation is going to be you do shulks, then you do 2 active abilities, you go back to do shulks again, and so on and so forth. So that's generally the rule of thumb for stamina wardens as well as magical wardens. You're kind of being centered around that 3-second duration here. So in that regard, you're going to have a dynamic rotation. So it's always going to be, again, shulks, 2 abilities, shulks, 2 abilities, shulks, 2 abilities, and so on and so forth, all the way through to execute. Now, I'll give you a demonstration of what I mean when it comes to kind of 2 abilities between each shulk cast. So just starting things off, you kind of want to make sure you have Bull Netch going. That's just for the sustain. Start off with the Rearming Trap, and then you first apply all of your backbar dots. Then you do shulks. And you can see here I'm doing 2 abilities, then shulks. This will be 2 abilities, so 1, 2, shulks. Back to my back bar and finish reapplying my dots. And do the same thing all over again. So you're basing it around that 2 abilities. So 1 ability, go back to shulks. Go back for shulks, that's 2 abilities again. And then back to shulks. So you can see here, you will do plenty of bar swapping as a stamina warden because, again, you're centering your rotation around getting those shulks off. So it's a 3-second rotation. So you just want to do shulks, 2 abilities, shulks, 2 abilities, shulks, 2 abilities here. So that does mean you will have to end up breaking your background rotation, and that's perfectly fine. You just want to make sure that once your first dot runs out on your background rotation, which will typically be Endless Hail, you just go back to your back bar to reapply those dots. So you will kind of need to be able to keep track of all your dots. So you, ideally, if you're running on PC, you have something like Strendar or Action Duration Reminder to kind of keep track of your dots that way. If you're on consoles, unfortunately, you are stuck with just the base game buff tracker instead. Alright, so that's all said and done. We're going to go ahead and do our parse. I'm just going to move the dummy because I've been having issues with Velidreth and not really being consistent here. I'm going to put it in that position there. So I will try to narrate throughout the parse just to kind of give you guys an idea of what's going on through my mindset while I'm doing the parse itself. Another thing that I do want to mention here, if you want to compare to other stamina classes, Stamina Wardens have Minor Berserk built in and Major Fracture built into their tooltips. So in self-buff parses, they have access to those 2, otherwise would be considered group buffs. The only other class that have these 2 buffs is the Stamina Nightblade. So Stamina Nightblades also have Major Fracture and Minor Berserk built into their abilities. The other 3 classes, so that's the Stamina Templar, Stamina DKs, and Stamina Sorks, lack one or both of these buffs. So Stamina DKs get Major Fracture but don't have Minor Berserk. Stamina Templars get Minor Fracture but they don't get Major Fracture and they don't have Minor Berserk. And then Stamina Sorks don't have either Major Fracture or Minor Berserk. Just something to keep in mind when you're comparing different parses. You kind of want to just know that Stamina Warden self-buff parses are generally going to be higher because they have that Major Fracture as well as that Minor Berserk as well. Let's go ahead and get started with this parse. So again, you start off with laying down all your backbar dots. Once you do your first cast of shulks, it's going to be 2 abilities between each cast of shulks. I just realized I did also forget one set. They will be down in the description below, but I'll talk about it here while I'm doing my rotation. And that's going to be War Machine. So because the Bear Ultimate only costs 75 Ultimate, you can make good use of War Machine, which is a medium armor set that's dropped from Halls of Fabrication. Now, due to the nature of War Machine, this can be either a body set or a front bar set. It doesn't matter because you have the Bear Ultimate on both bars. It doesn't really matter which kind of place you put that War Machine, but you do need to have access to Morrowind, Vardenfell, in order to run War Machine. You can kind of see here what I'm talking about with the sustain stuff. So if you do need to use a heavy attack, do one right after you cast a Shulk's ability. And for the purposes of Shulk's, a heavy attack would count as 2 abilities. I'm kind of screwing up a little bit here. I was talking about the heavy attacking stuff. Alright, so that parse is a little bit wonky just because I realized I forgot about a few things that I wanted to discuss. So hopefully you guys heard through the rotation there. So yeah, War Machine is another set you want to pick up. It is a medium armor set from Halls of Fabrication, which is the trial in Vardenfell. So you will need to have access to Morrowind, and you can use it either on the body or the front bar set because you do have the bear double barred, so it doesn't really matter where you put it in that instance there. Now, in terms of heavy attacks, like I mentioned, if you're going to be doing a heavy attack, cast Shulks, do one heavy attack. You can use one ability in addition to the heavy attack, and then run Shulks again. Usually, the heavy attack will count more or less as 2 abilities, but to play it safe, you can do a heavy attack ability and then Shulks again. You will have a little bit of downtime, but that's perfectly fine. We're talking maybe like half a second or so. You can see here that Shulks is a very strong ability here. The max crit that we got was 40.4k. Very, very powerful, and it also is very strong cleave. So that 40.4k could potentially hit multiple targets when it goes off. So that's why Subterranean Assault, you want to kind of center your rotation around this here. Endless Hail, still very powerful. Relequen, very strong set nonetheless. Unsurprisingly, it's been a very strong set this whole time here. Now, with the Bear Ultimate, the Bear does a pretty decent amount of damage here. So the Bear Ultimate, when you combine all the different things here, does about like 4,500 DPS or so, which puts it actually number 5 in terms of total DPS contributed. So the Bear is definitely a very strong ultimate to use, but again, you can run Dawnbreaker on the front bar and Ballista on the back bar if you so desire. So you can see here, because of our rotation, we're on our front bar a lot. Just to recast Subterranean Assault, Berserking Warrior / Advancing Yokeda, you get very good uptimes. You don't really need to like pay attention to maybe like doing a light attack into your Endless Hail, for example, because you're going to be on your back bar in 2 seconds anyways. So you don't really have to worry as much or be as conscious about that Advancing Yokeda uptime on a Stamina Warden here. So that is pretty much it for this build video. So as you can tell from this DPS, Stamina Wardens are a very strong class overall. They're only outmatched by Stamina Nightblades when it comes to DPS potential. So if you guys have access to the Warden, definitely give it a go if you want to play something different than a Stamina Nightblade. If you guys have any questions or comments about this build, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.